while he bends our will. Echoes whisper, the night draws near. By the firelight, our fears collide. The Carolina storyteller, our guide. Through the spooky, the fervent fight. Fables of darkness igniting the night of the night.
Hi, folks. Welcome back to the Carolina Storyteller. I am your Carolina Storyteller, Jonathan Phoenix. Happy to be here with you guys today. Happy to be telling stories, as it were. Just a little heads up and a reminder, you can support this show, Not Just Paranormal, and Valmont by going to patreon.com/The Carolina Storyteller. All three of these shows are always going to be free for you to listen to, and I am trying my best to make sure that if I have any ads on there, they're going to be ads that are relevant to you. But they are not free to make, and we could really use your support, especially with Valmont growing as fast as it is. Anyway, you don't want to hear about all that. You guys are here for stories, and you're here for spooky paranormal stories like I normally tell, and I've got a pair for you. I don't really tell a lot of stories about Berkeley County because I didn't grow up in Berkeley County. My dad lived here. I knew there was some stuff here, but I lived in Georgetown. So that's where all the stories that I knew and I grew up with were from. But when I got up here, I did get to learn some of the stories of Berkeley County. And so today I want to share with you a couple of those stories. So let's go back in time. You know that I'm big on the American Revolution and the history of this area because it's South Carolina was just major in it. Okay, Charleston was a major port. There was a lot going on. A lot of people were doing things here, right here. And this was the center of a major portion of the war. Charleston was a major port, so trying to retake Charleston was a big deal. It was nuts. And so the British, when they came in, as they took Charleston, they tried to take their foothold, and they came all the way up into Moncks Corner. There's actually a battle of Moncks Corner in which the Patriots lost initially. Like this is where we lost ground. This was one of the main battles that we lost, and the British took Moncks Corner, and they held Moncks Corner in Charleston for quite some time during the American Revolution. It's just what happened. One of the sites that they used was a place called Biggins Church. Now, Biggins Church is very interesting because if you'll remember, there is another church that I've talked about, Prince George Episcopal Church in Georgetown, that the British used as kind of like a storage facility and a barracks and things like that. Well, the British did the same thing with Biggins, but Biggins had already kind of a history. See, Biggins was built in 1711, and it was built in 1711 and burned down a few years later. And it was rebuilt, and there was a forest fire. It was burned down in 1755. And it was rebuilt again. And the British came and the British took it over. Well, in the middle of the Revolutionary War, after Francis Marion had been pulling his crap and causing the British all kinds of hell, the Patriots, they were making a comeback. Lafayette had shown up. Hamilton was pushing, and we were pushing back hard. And that meant that the British were losing ground. And as opposed to giving up what they had there that they couldn't take with them, the British set alight, once again, Biggins Church. So for the third time, the church and everything in it burned to the ground. The British were then chased to a place called Quimby's Bridge, which was just a massive loss for them. They did not do well. Biggins Church was rebuilt, of course. It was rebuilt. It was used kind of during the Civil War, and it was damaged a bit during the Civil War, but they fixed it up. And all the way until yet another forest fire came through in the 1890s. Forest fires were not good for this church, it seems. Biggins Church once again burned down. And this time, what was left, they repurposed the bricks, and they didn't try again after the 1890s. That was the last go for Biggins Church. So from 1711 to 1890, this church was rebuilt 4 times. Okay, it was built, then it was rebuilt, then it was rebuilt again, then it was rebuilt again. Finally, somebody said, you know what? No, we're giving up. Same thing happened to Old Gun Church in Georgetown. Must be a thing with churches, and after they burn down so many times, you're just like, nah, we're not doing it again. But anyway, it was after the last fire that things began to get a little weird. People began to have experiences. This church, of course, had attached to it a graveyard. And as you know from my previous story, when these churches have graveyards attached to them, the graves in there are very old. When you have Episcopal graveyard, the one where I had my experience, I mean, there were graves in there that dated back to 1714. And this church was built in 1711. So you can only imagine that there were probably already graves there, because usually the graves go in before the church goes in. That's just the way it goes. So, like I said, the church was built, graves were there, and the graves have been there for many a years. Now, you can find Biggins Church just by driving down Highway 402 outside of Moncks Corner. The graveyard is there, and the ruins are still there. Just a couple of walls stacked up. But people began to experience things in Biggins Church. They began to see things when they went there, what looked like spirits and shades, ghosts, goblins, all of that. What was weird is that during the day, when they went onto the grounds of the actual church, they would begin to experience, if they went into the church proper, where the church proper would have been, they would become ill and weak, dizzy. Some of them would become nauseous. But, once they got off the property, they would be fine. Then, of course, came the digital age. And this is where things start to get interesting. People would feel weird things and then, get back in your car, turn on your radio, and an eerie song would be playing, like The Ghost of You or Fire, you know, something like that, something that almost seems like it ironically connects to the site and the spirits in the graveyard, but doesn't really. It's just a weird coincidence, you almost want to say. But then the experiences started getting worse for people. People would take pictures, of course, and then they would have ghostly images showing up in their pictures. People would report events happening at their home as if they brought something home for them, home with them from the church. The most recent occurrence happened in 2014 that someone has reported. Now, I say the most recent. It's the most recent report I could find when I was looking it up. And that means that somebody actually went out there, documented it, and reported it in 2014 about how them and their family went out to visit Biggins Church. And they walked around the graveyard. And when they stepped foot in the church and went to take a picture, they became overwhelmed with a feeling of nausea. They became dizzy. Their wife literally had to escort them out of the church grounds, and they got back in the car, and it felt horrible. Um, and while they were there, they had taken a picture and sent that picture to their mother. Um, and this is where things get a little interesting. They get out of the church, get in the car, go to drive off. As I mentioned, the song "The Ghost of You" immediately started playing as they drove off. Something didn't sit right with them. They still didn't feel right. So the next day, as he's on his way to work, he stops by and he looks at the church, and he doesn't go in the church, but he doesn't feel anything again. But he gets to this one grave, and for some reason, this one grave sticks out to him. Well, then the next day, the grave was for a doctor or something. Well, the next day, the mother, who got the picture, texted him and said, "Hey, that picture you sent me? Who was that doctor in the picture?" There was no doctor out there with him. It was just him and his family. And that was just one of the many accounts of weird things happening with pictures taken at Biggins Church. Strange things, spooky things happening. And like I said, Um, Biggins Church, you can find it simply by going down Highway 402, just outside of Moncks Corner. The ruins still stand there today, and people still to this day claim that have eerie and strange experiences out there. They never say that it's anything horrible, but they do feel like it's mischievous, if anything. And of course, going into the church, you feel nauseous and almost sick if you spend too much time there. But going from one side of Moncks Corner, which is Highway 402, we're going to go all the way up to Highway 6 almost. Because we're going to go into a little area of Panopolis. Now, Moncks Corner is kind of sitting on the corner of a lake, and there are smaller communities surrounding Moncks Corner. You have Childsbury, Strawberry, Cordsville, Macedonia, Cross, Santee Circle, which is where I was a fire captain, and then Pinopolis. Now, Pinopolis is this little peninsula in Moncks Corner that runs all the way out into the middle of the lake. Well, not the middle of the lake, but all the way out into the lake. So it's surrounded by the lake. And along this peninsula, there's a single road that runs all the way to the end of it where Santee Cooper has this resort style thing that they let their employees use as kind of a vacation spot. Um, Along this road, there is a place called Nazareth Cemetery. And in Nazareth Cemetery, there is a specially known grave that people amongst Corner talk about, Nazareth Annie. Nazareth Annie was a beautiful young girl. She was smart, polite, kind. Uh, every guy's dream in Moncks Corner. She married a guy named Bill. Now, on the outside, Bill seemed to be just the perfect bachelor. He had a good job. He came from a good family. He had good manners. He dressed well. He carried himself well. Everyone thought it was a smart match for Annie and Bill. Bill was a drinker, and Bill was a very violent man. He abused Annie regularly, taking out his anger for whatever reason on her, both physically, emotionally, however he could. He abused poor Annie. One day, Bill came home from the bar after work. He was highly intoxicated, and something about the meal that Annie cooked. He couldn't even tell the officers later what it was. But something just didn't set right with him. So he lit upon Annie and attacked her full force, just beating on her. And he grabbed a knife from the kitchen and he cut off poor Annie's head. And he took the head with him and left the house and went back out to the bar. Now, of course, people started looking for Annie. They went to the house. They found Annie dead. Bill was arrested, but Bill doesn't remember where he took the head. He got drunk and completely forgot, you know. He was intoxicated at the time. He didn't remember. Bill was, of course, arrested, charged, imprisoned. He didn't get the death penalty, but he got to go and spend the rest of his time in a jail in Colombia, which, you know, is nice for a guy like that. I think he earned it. But Annie was laid to rest in Nazareth Cemetery without her head. That's when the sightings started. At night, people would drive past Nazareth Cemetery and they would claim to see a woman in white searching through the graveyard. And it was only when they would approach her that they would realize that she didn't have a head. It was the spirit of Annie searching for her head, something that she supposedly does every night. Now, what's interesting is Nazareth Cemetery is the same cemetery where, when I was delivering pizza back in 2003, I drove past and I saw a woman in a white, looked like a nightgown, walking in the pouring rain. It was pouring rain. And I dropped off the pizza and then doubled back, and I didn't see her, so I stopped at my buddy's house there. He was chief of the fire department at the time, and I knew him through my dad. And, you know, I was like, hey, there was this girl walking on the road in all white. but I don't know where she went. And you're the closest house. Did you see her? Because there's not been another car that's come through here behind me." And he's like, "John, if you saw her, you just encountered one of the oldest ghosts in Moncks Corner." And I'm like, "What? Really?" And I never got the story from him. I never asked because I had to get back to work, but I was just really shook up about that. Well, it turns out that after several years, I found out that that spirit was most likely Nazareth Annie. She was out walking the street searching for her head that had been taken off by her husband, Bill. So that's our two stories for today, folks. I really hope that you enjoyed them. I hope it gives you an idea of what I live around here in Moncks Corner, being caught between Nazareth Annie and Biggins Church. You know, and while Biggins Church might not be a super source of paranormal activity, it does have its individual quirkiness, and it definitely does stand as a place to be wary of at night, probably. You don't want to go in there and play with anything. But Biggins Church is a very beautiful place to visit. And even to this day, people go out there and they will use it as a great backdrop for photos. And don't worry about the co-crawling, that's just my alarm. But they use it for photos, for like graduation photos or married wedding photos. People even have their wedding outside the ruins of the church, there on the grounds at Biggins Church. It's just a really pretty place, and I hope that it continues to stay that way for a long time because some of the places in South Carolina really are beautiful because of the history that they hold, and not necessarily they wouldn't be beautiful anywhere else but here with the history surrounding them. I hope you guys enjoyed the story. I hope to see you guys next week. Remember, this coming weekend, we've got another episode of Not Just Paranormal, more cryptid combat. It's going to be a lot of fun. I believe I've got Amanda Marie is going to be my special guest this week, along with some of my other panelists. So be sure to tune into that. And of course, take care of yourselves and stay spooky, my friends. We'll see you next time.